good people out there, and welcome to BLOCKCHANCE Online Live. My name is Sönke Misfeld, I'm your host, and this show is brought to you by BLOCKCHANCE, Central Europe's biggest and leading blockchain and AI conference and platform, media platform. So BLOCKCHANCE Online Live is an online broadcasted talk show in the field of artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, as well as sustainability and related technologies. So each show we bring together inspiring speakers and innovative thought leaders to discuss with them the current and future developments within these fields, and most importantly, to see how we can leverage these disruptions for a more fair and sustainable future. So stay tuned and see more what's happening here on BLOCKCHANCE Online Live. BLOCKCHANCE Online Live is a collaborative open platform, and we want you to be a part of it. So please subscribe to our newsletter so we can keep you updated, and also subscribe to our Telegram channel so you can give us your suggestions and feedback, and we can upgrade the next shows with your help. You can also be a part of this show directly by typing your questions in the Twitch live chat. We will pick the best fitting ones and ask them by the end of the show. Oh, and before I forget it, we have a BLOCKCHANCE 2021 ticket giveaway in the middle of the show, where you can win a BLOCKCHANCE conference ticket situated here in Hamburg in July. So stay tuned for that. And now let me introduce to you today's topic. It is the beginning of a new era. Can blockchain technology help to fulfill the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by solving some of the biggest problems of our time? So to get this started, I would at first like to thank our guests for being here and making the show what it is. And now let me introduce to you today's guests. Our first guest is Marc Buckley. He is the advocate for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. He is member of the World Economic Forum Expert Network, and he's a lecturer, a speaker, a serial entrepreneur, and most importantly, a frontline fighter for a more resilient future. So please say hello to the audience, Marc. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me here, Horst. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Marc. Our second speaker would have been Iselin, but sadly, she's currently in the hospital and cannot participate today. She sends all her love and apologies, but Alice, in case you see this right now, please don't feel sorry at all. Take care about yourself. This is most important, and we are all just fine here, and we will definitely invite you to the show on another day, because you would have had a lot to say about what we are discussing now. And most importantly, we all give you our best wishes, and we hope you will be fine. And our third speaker, I hope the techniques have changed to them right now, is Brian Iselin. He's a former soldier and federal agent who's been fighting against modern slavery for 2 decades by now. And he's the founder and CEO of the NGO SLAVEFREETRADE. It's the world's first human rights compliance platform for assessing and monitoring workplace conditions globally in real time. So really excited to have you here. Say hello, Brian.
Thanks very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, so we can directly start with the first question, and this goes to both of you. Maybe you could just please introduce yourself a little to the audience and give us an overview about the most exciting problems that have to do, projects that you're working at that have to do with blockchain technology. Maybe we start with Marc.
Hello, my name is Marc Buckley. So I do a lot of different projects with the United Nations. Obviously, one of the biggest ones that I'm here for today is as an advocate for the Sustainable Development Goals. But a couple really interesting ones that really involve blockchain and emerging technologies are, first and foremost, the Climate Change Coalition, which was one of the first blockchain organizations that were accepted into the United Nations in 2018, working on climate using blockchain technologies for carbon offsetting and different things for carbon credits and movements around measuring and keeping that secure. A big one that was last year that really has to do with emerging technology, blockchain, AI, is resilience frontiers. And so that started in Songdo, Korea last year, and it's called Resilience Frontiers. And what it is the roadmap after the Sustainable Development Goals. So from 2030 to 2050, and they're calling it Resilience Frontiers because it could be the Resilience Development Goals, and it has to do with emerging technologies, frontier pioneering technologies like blockchain, like AI, Internet of Things, this digital transition, and how we use those to solve our global grand challenges. And then the last one that's really interesting, also started last year, is called the Digital Ecosystem for the Earth. And it's using well over 1,200 geospatial data points that are services like Google Earth and the German DLR, the European Space Agency, NASA, and many other geospatial data, and puts them into one user-friendly interface with blockchain, distributed ledger technology, so that it's secure, so that it's open source, transparent, to be used for everybody for the benefit also to solve our global grand challenges. And then, as Horst said, for the World Economic Forum, every year at Davos, I run the Innovation Hub, which presents emerging technologies or innovations for purpose that solve global grand challenges. So I could go on and on about the other things that I do and talk about, but I think those are some really good points to discuss today to let you know why I'm here and how we can kind of move forward discussing emerging technologies. And I appreciate you having me on the show.
Thank you very much, Marc. That's actually many different projects, and probably each of them would be worth a total complete show on their own. So yeah, let's hope we get that stuck together for this show. So let me directly forward this question for Brian. Could you please introduce yourself a little and tell us something about the projects you're working with blockchain?
Yeah, so thanks very much again for having me. I'm not sure I can follow on in the footsteps of Marc. It'll certainly be, it's a long shadow he's cast. Let me say that I started out as an organized crime guy, counter-organized crime guy, and in the last 18 years been a counter-slavery guy. And it was very much the operational experience that spoke to me about what was lacking in our solutions to the problem. One of the biggest missing pieces in counter-slavery work, and this is why blockchain itself lends potential to solutions for modern slavery, is lack of trust. So it's a very big central problem in our solutions to modern slavery, is that we completely fail to build trust between the different actors, no matter what we do. All of the actions are disaggregated, let's say. And it's a world in which there is very little trust, and we're not building it. So blockchain lent itself very well to the issue of human rights and addressing modern slavery, because trust is at the core. And I think in a system, this is one of the big promises of blockchain. In a system where there are actors that don't know each other and don't have any reason to trust each other, that you can be brought together in a way that you can trust the information that is at least in the system and being transferred from one person or one actor to another. So building trust in a trustless environment. So this is where blockchain really came in. So I started SlaveFreeTrade 4 years ago now, and we've been in the blockchain community, so to speak, since 2017. Very active in this space, trying to create a wave of change, trying to bring blockchain in support of human rights. To be frank, it's for the moment, it's still only potential, but this is something we can discuss. But it is one of those areas where I think the blockchain is underexposed and certainly underutilized, and can be, let's hope in 2021, we'll see it come to fruition.
Yeah, thank you very much. I totally agree with you, and I think trust is the biggest word, and it brings me to actually the question I was about to ask um, later on, and what the biggest aspects of blockchain are for the SDGs. But before we do that, we will have to talk a little bit about the SDGs themselves, because I don't think that everybody in the world is already familiar with them, and it is a very, very important topic. It touches each and everyone's life. Marc, as you are in that field, I think there's nobody better to give us a short overview about what the SDGs are, how they came to be, and what the goal is behind that.
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. So I really also have a lot to do with food, and that was probably one of the things that I didn't really touch upon on my introduction, but you're going to find out really quickly when I describe to you the Sustainable Development Goals, why that is. So I'm sorry if you did not understand or you don't know what the SDGs are as the acronym or the Sustainable Development Goals are. That's the United Nations fault. That's our politicians. That's our leadership fault that we didn't present them to you in the right way. For those of you who do know what they are, I'm so glad. I'm glad you do it. What I really run into a lot is when people find out I'm an advocate for the SDGs, they're like, "Oh, great! I love number one. It's red, my favorite color. No poverty." And I say, "Great, but did you know it's virtually impossible to work on one sustainable development goal and not touch on all the others because they're tied together as a system?" And so that's one thing that people really don't know about the Sustainable Development Goals. But there's an even bigger one, and that is in emerging technology industries or fields. We really talk about moonshots. We talk about these innovations and these real cutting edge things, AI, Internet of Things, etc. But I want you to know that there is a thing called the world's first ever global moonshot, and that is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It is a historical precedent. The only time before in our world where we've had such a big moonshot is when John F. Kennedy made the announcement to put men on the moon, and his uh, really push for the space race to get a men on the moon. And that was one country with a collaboration with a few other continents or a few other countries and a couple thousand people, was kind of localized and nationalized. The reason the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are the world's first ever global moonshot is because for the first time ever in the world's history, 193 countries came together for the first time ever and agreed on a roadmap, a plan of action that is with math and science and backcasting and tools to reach a goal for a better, more desirable future. And it also ties to the Paris Agreement, the 2030 agenda, which is to keep our planet below 1.5 degrees of warming by December 2030. And when we were presented with them, which was September 24th in 2015. So if you still haven't heard about them, if you don't know about them, I'm so sorry because we're already 5 years into it. So that would tell you that we're already 5 years behind for taking some serious action on them, which is okay. They weren't presented to us right. They were presented from 1 to 17 in a very linear fashion laid out. And I could go through and read each of them for you, but I'm not going to do it in that way. What I want to do is I want you to imagine what December 2030 would feel like. I'm going to read you a Sustainable Development Goal manifesto that I wrote for the United Nations to give everyone a vision instead of just some shiny, colorful goals. Who are they for? Are they for countries? Are they for businesses? Are they for us as individuals? To give a vision to what it would feel like when we reach that point in time in December 2030. I want to read that to you now. Imagine a world where there is no poverty and zero hunger. We have good health and well-being, quality education, and full gender equality everywhere. There is clean water and sanitation for everyone. Affordable and clean energy has created decent work and sustainable economic growth. Our prosperity is fueled by investments in resilient industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and that has reduced inequalities. We live in sustainable cities and communities, and responsible consumption and production has healed our planet. Climate action has stopped and reversed the warming of our planet, and we have flourishing life below water and abundant, diverse life on land. We enjoy peace and justice through strong institutions and have built long-term partnerships for the goals. Now, that's a world that I want to live in by December 2030. And I don't know if you listen good enough that you could see and feel yourself December 2030, what that type of a world would look like. Now, the reason they're called Sustainable Development Goals is because to sustain oneself means to be around for multiple generations, to have multiple resources over generations, and to be able to continue life and your business and your family for multiple generations. And the development part is just how all humanity develops itself. It's basically the infrastructure of the cities and the countries and the counties and the communities we live in. And it's to sustain that well into the future. Development, as I read all these, are all tied to the digital transition, to emerging technologies. Every one of the 17 goals is tied to that innovative technology to keep us up to speed with emerging technologies. And all of them are tied to agriculture, seafood, food and beverages, which is our battery, our energy source for the world. And if you ever compare the SDGs to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the bottom two layers of that pyramid are physiological needs for humanity. And that's what these goals provide for all of us. And so I think I've given you a good enough overview of what they are, and I'll turn it back over to Horst.
Oh man, yeah, it sounds too good to be true, actually, but it has to become true, actually. So we need to go forward on that path. You will probably later on give us a little insight on how we've done so far, and I guess current developments kind of accelerate that and give us more potential to achieve that goal, actually. So not everything is bad behind Corona. That's what I can see from that perspective. Maybe it's, yeah, Brian.
Maybe could I jump in and just add a human rights dimension to the SDGs? Would that be appropriate now?
That is very appropriate. Thank you.
Awesome. So the way the SDGs are constructed, and Marc, thanks for a fantastic exposition on the SDGs. The way the SDGs are constructed, human rights as a body of international law are actually cross-cutting. That is, there is not a human rights indicator in the or goal in the development goals. Human rights appear underneath all of the goals and through the targets and indicators underneath each of them. So when you're looking at the body of human rights, and so with slave-free trade, we're talking principally about human rights in workplaces, then we see it featured, we see human rights featured in goal 3, with a safe and healthy workplace. We see human rights featured in goal 5 on gender equality, no gender pay gap, no sexual harassment, no sexual abuse, etc. We also see 17. Now 17 is a very important SDG because it is all about the partnerships and collaboration that are required to make everything else possible. So the public sector and private sector partnerships are very, very important foundation for addressing these, because unless we're all working together, we're not going to achieve it. Point 8, of course, is very important for slave-free trade, for workplace human rights, because we're talking Sustainable Development Goal 8 is about economic development and employment. So we're talking about employment contracts, safe and healthy workplaces, no discrimination, no forced labor, and so on. And then, of course, we've got goals 10, 11, 12. If you have a look at the goals, there's a number of places human rights come out. Great workplaces, people working well together, people being treated well, community building resilient communities, which of course requires workplaces that are working very well for that community. So this is the way human rights are threaded, if you like, right through the SDGs. And it's a very important thing to understand. There is not a single goal for human rights. There are human rights embedded in all goals.
You're actually describing a big problem I had in preparing for this show, because I was trying to pick out like single SDGs and say, okay, this is the goal that you're working at with your project. And what I realized that there is like at least 3 or 4 goals that I could directly identify, that both of your projects are, and Marc is working in so many different projects that makes it even more hard for me.
Honestly, Horst, if I can interrupt, most everybody has that problem in the beginning. They think that they need to cherry pick 1 or 2 to fit into their business, into their life, into their model. And that's not how it works. The goals are done through backcasting and systems dynamic modeling with this systems approach, that they're all intertwined. If you were to, for instance, take number 1, no poverty, and say, that's the one I'm going to work on and focus in on, it would be virtually impossible not to touch on good health and well-being, quality education, life on land, clean water and sanitation, responsible consumption and production, and many, many others, because they're all tied to that. Because and this is a big shift that humanity took in 2018. Before, we used to have this siloed or very linear approach to solving our global grand challenges, and they weren't working. And so in 2018, all international organizations took this very systems approach to solving our global grand challenges, moving away from silos and getting into more multifaceted systems to solve them and addressing all the roots and the causes. And as Brian said so eloquently, that the human rights thread runs through all of that. The goals are tied to each and every one of us. There are basic physiological needs of humanity to thrive in the future, to thrive now if we could put them into practice.
Yeah. And this speaks to, sorry if we're laboring this, but it's also important to point out that Marc mentioned that a lot of people actually don't know what the SDGs are. And I think on an individual level, it's because they haven't necessarily been rolled out or communicated in a way that is digestible, to be frank. It should be, it needs to be injected into school curriculum under civil studies or something. There needs to be more work on that. But where it has been rolled out with quite considerable effect is with business. So businesses through, for example, the UN Global Compact Network, they've actually rolled out SDGs to businesses so that we get businesses. I'm speaking to businesses all the time and saying, well, we want to report against the SDGs. And the difficulty that those businesses have is this network or systems approach, because they are not used to the systems approach, to be frank. So when they're trying to report on the SDGs, they're saying, but I just want to do water. That's a goal and I can do that. So the cross-cutting nature is really important for getting all our needs and addressing them systemically, but then having a company report on them in an annual report, for example, that becomes a little complicated because reporting on a systems level is complex. And I think this is something that systems that we develop to do that reporting are going to have to take account of. And so that's one of the things that we need to be aware.
Brian hit the nail on the head. He really did, because it's because not only is it complex, but the UN Global Compact really helps businesses to see that complexity and realize that they can't cherry pick 1 or 2 or do good on 1 or 2 and do bad on the others. It negates each other. And so that the UN Global Compact also for businesses works on 10 principles. One of the principles is really about Brian's top point, human trafficking, fair wage, fair labor, all the things that slave trade that you're working on is so eloquently touched in business, which ties to SDGs.
So I really hope that systems approach is not too complex for companies and corporations and governments to actually understand it and implement. And most importantly, I think we need an informed public, and a system is always more complex, right? But before we get deeper into that, actually, I would like to get this down into blockchain perspective, because this is actually what the big topic is. Can blockchain solve some of global's biggest problems, and how can that support the SDGs? And Marc, maybe because Alice is now not with us, maybe you could step in and tell us a little bit about the most important aspects that blockchain technology promises and that can help fulfill the SDGs in different perspectives.
Sure. So really with blockchain technologies, I really like distributed ledger technology. I like it because it's this form of a trustless system. What we're seeing all around the world is when we get into complexity science, when we get into complexity or systems, humanity tends to have a meltdown. They're like, oh, that's so complicated. That's so hard to understand. And it's overwhelming. And I'm just not equipped to deal with that. Well, how do you embrace systems and how do you embrace that? Well, most of us are all equipped with systems, and we're running the most complex systems computer, our bodies, and our every single day. But it runs homogenically. It runs automatically. It's really on autopilot, because if you think about it, the human body is made up of 11 systems, but not one of those 11 systems, the skeletal system, the digestive system, the nervous system, controls the other 10. They all kind of work together as a complex system to keep your body going. There's not, okay, now get up, now walk, now talk, now drink. And you just can't do one of those at a time. They all work together. But if you break a bone, those other 10 systems kind of compensate to fix and help your body. And you know, that's how we can embrace complexity and systems thinking, realize that we deal with it and everything in our world's made up of that. But that's that extra layer that we're getting into with these emerging technologies, especially blockchain, is it's a tool for humanity to get into a trustless system and something that is secure and decentralized, and that will give us this extra layer of help and security, so that we don't have to say, oh, do I want to put my money in Wells Fargo? Do I want to put my money with Bank of America or ING or whatever bank? It says, here's a trustless system, and you don't have to decide which one you're going to trust. It takes a lot of things out of that whole process and moves you into a different direction. And so I really believe that what we're seeing is if we can adopt that, we can embrace this complexity in the systems and apply these exponentially growing and emerging technologies that are also good for sustainability and resilience in our world, that it'll make it lighter for us. It'll make it easier for humanity to kind of say, that's the type of systems we need to have. The biggest example is, and I mentioned this a lot of times in a joking way, we didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. We left the Stone Age because there was a better way, a better system, a better technology to do it. We're still stuck in the Industrial Revolution, a lot of waste, a lot of things that just don't make sense. And today and yesterday is a big example of that, as the elections in the United States. It's not about the political choice or the democracy. I don't want to touch on that. It's about the actual voting system. I heard comments when I was watching the news that they need billions of dollars just to update certain counties and states' voting systems so that they're more live and real time and more secure. No, what we need to do is bring the entire voting system out of the dark ages into the digital revolution, using emerging technologies to get them into a trustless system that works in real time with humanity, instead of having humanity, you know, wait up for results on an election and then have them say, oh, we're still counting the ballots, or we're still, you know, doing this paper trail. It's like one last example. It's like sending Buzz Aldrin to the moon, the captain who flew the first Apollo mission that landed on the moon, with the latest computing power, the latest emerging technologies, the latest technology, gets to the moon. He pees in a spacesuit. He breathes in outer space. He lives in outer space in these harsh conditions, makes it safely back to the Earth, and then he has to fill out a handwritten, typed, and signed form for moon rock that he brought back, or for his travel voucher to be paid, which is on an analog piece of paper. Those two worlds don't function together. And we are in an exponentially growing world that's moving quickly and fastly, good, bad, and ugly. And we need to embrace those emerging technologies, of which blockchain is part of it, to get us into a better system, to embrace that complexity, to kind of guide us on this road that we want to go for a better future. Because what we're seeing now is counting votes by hand and paper and mail-in and all these other things. Those are systems that are just not working for us anymore. We need to update our world.
And it's obviously very vulnerable, and yeah, it shouldn't be possible. You're right. And we already have these technologies out there. Some of them might be in the developing age still and need some sandboxes in between on a municipal area, for example. But it is there. I know there are functional blockchain-based voting systems. It's just that obviously some players don't have it in their interest yet to implement it. But I hope, like, current very bad examples that we have, that we're witnessing at the moment, pushes that forward as well, right? So out of crisis, some potential for change raises. So yeah, we have this immutable database, we have this transparency, and I think this is probably for what Brian is doing with slave-free trade. This is probably the most important parts. So basically, under the big impression of a trustless system. Brian, could you maybe dig down a little deeper on what slave-free trade is doing? Because I've been, as I said, I've been looking through the goals, and I've seen you already listed them. It's end poverty, it's provide decent work, it's reduce inequalities. It touches so many different SDGs, what you're doing. So maybe tell us a little bit more about the producers side of that game and how blockchain-based documentation can help.
Well, effectively, I mentioned right at the very beginning that lack of trust in certain circumstances, a breakdown of trust in trusting relationships, is actually a contributing cause, or a significant cause, of what we're talking about here with modern slavery and all of the workplace human rights issues. So all workplace human rights issues are related to modern slavery. The best way to think about this is that human rights exist along a spectrum. Human rights in a workplace exist along a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum is decent work, where we all wish to be, right? That's the place we want to all be working. It's the place with the ping pong tables, and where there's no gender, no racial discrimination, no gender inequality, etc. That's decent work. At the other end of the spectrum is modern slavery. Now, there are thousands of ways to define modern slavery, and unfortunately, it's a constant source of debate about how you define it and what you include in it. You don't have that problem if you start at the decent work end. So this is what slave-free trade is doing, right? We say, well, okay, you've got your definitional issues down there when you talk about modern slavery. Let's not talk about that. Let's rather talk about human rights in workplaces and how they look when they look good. So let's talk about decent work in workplaces. Let's prove decent work in workplaces. And decent work and modern slavery are like kryptonite to each other. They can't coexist. You prove one, you disprove the other. So that's the approach we take. Now, to do that, we need to build trust in these broken relationships, these existing broken relationships. So we talk about three real core relationships: between consumer and retailer, between supplier and producer, and between employer and employee. So every single thing we're building in our behavioral system touches on how it builds trust in those relationships. So blockchain lends itself perfectly to all three of those relationships, because in certainly in at least two of them, none of the actors know each other very well. The consumer and the retailer really don't know each other and really don't understand each other particularly well. Suppliers and producers likewise. But at the workplace level, employer and employee, these are largely a trustless situation, a trustless complex situation. So we find that where there is a breakdown in human rights respect in a workplace, it largely stems from a breakdown in trust. So what we can do is we can build up trust in that workplace. And the way we do that is with, for example, the technology, marrying technology and human rights which is what the Slave Free Project is about. We combine these two, put them into a workplace in the hands of a system that requires both employer and employee to contribute equally, trusting each other with the result, trusting their contribution with each other. So an employer joins a system and says, I want to prove decent work in my workplaces, and we and our staff are going to work together to make that possible in a transparent way. Our workplace is going to be open to scrutiny, and in doing so, the employer is showing that they trust their employees in that, and the employees are then also, in their responses, they're showing that they trust the employer is going to act accordingly. So the building of this trust relationship is important. So we get this system where employers join, and they then bring their staff in, and their staff are then trusted by the employer to provide feedback on their work site, and we can verify that. So the way blockchain speaks to us, the potential pieces for blockchain to be active there include the anonymity and confidentiality of the individuals in those workplaces can be guaranteed by the application of blockchain technology in the communication process. So an employer is then trusting their employees, who can act anonymously or do act anonymously, and that anonymity cannot be broken. So this is a very important piece of building trust. It's like that team building exercise where you're standing on a chair and you have to fall blindfolded, and you have to fall backwards into the arms of your colleagues and hope to hell they catch you. It's that kind of thing on a massive scale.
Brian, before we have to go to our break, could you maybe give us a little bit more of an imagination about what slave-free trade is in that aspect? Is it like a platform that the employer, the corporates can join to do their compliance blockchain based? Is that the right description?
It's not the perfect. It's a piece of what we're doing. So slave-free trade is a behavioral system. So we talked about systems complexity before. So systems thinking at work is what slave-free trade is. It's a behavioral system bringing together good actors to incentivize good actions by other good actors. And in so doing, we're building a virtuous cycle of increasingly good actions. So an organization, we are trying to measure human rights in workplaces, quantify human rights in workplaces. Our unit of measure is workplaces and people. Any organization, whether it's a business, a producer, a UN organization, or an NGO, or whatever, if you have workplaces and people, that's the unit of measure. We're working to measure conditions of those people in every workplace, quantifying human rights in a trustable way, so that each of the parties is giving each other trust and building that relationship. And then we communicate that, results of that, to people whose decisions can be influenced by that information once they trust it, if they trust it. So we communicate the information about what's going on in a workplace and a chain of workplaces. So you see the supply chain connection there. In a chain of workplaces that are linked, we communicate that to someone who's buying a product that comes from that chain of workplaces, whether it be a professional consumer or like a public procurement agency, for example, or a private consumer, so an ethical consumer buying a chocolate bar in Edinburgh, Scotland. We communicate that to them in a way that they know they can trust what's behind that, because at the moment there isn't any system like that, no social label that they can trust, that they can look on the face of it and say, we can absolutely trust what's going on behind that. So it's building a system where each of the actors puts information in a trusted way and gets information out in a trusted way without any of them knowing each other.
So you're basically providing the producer with a possibility to prove what they're doing better, and empowering the consumer to decide, I just want to buy stuff that is proven slave-free. And I think
or investor wanting to invest in a company that has no human rights abuses, or a public procurement agency that wants police boots with no slavery, or a law firm that wants to prove that it has great diversity, for example, or no gender pay gap. To be able to prove all of those things, lots of actors want to be able to prove that, but there's no basis of trust. If a law firm in the United States came out and said, we're the most diverse law firm in the United States, where's the proof? So we provide that in a way that can be trusted by the reader, whoever that reader happens to be.
Yeah, and I think I memorized a number that you said in one of your talks I found on YouTube. It's like 70% of the producers could not prove today that their products are slave-free, right? So
the numbers vary, but 77% of businesses in the UK are likely to have slavery behind their products.
Oh, that is even worse.
There are more than 400 product groups in the world that have modern slavery behind them, and because they're always, largely at the bottom of large commodity chains, that's where the worst or the most egregious abuses occur. Then they get injected into all sorts of places. So if you look at rubber, for example, or palm oil or coconut oil, those products go into lots of other products.
Yeah.
Cocoa, sugar goes everywhere. So modern slavery and sugar ends up all over the world. That's how it disperses, just like dropping dye in a glass of water.
So Brian, thank you for that insight. I'm sorry to interrupt at this point, but we're already a little overdue to our break. And this is going to happen now, and stay tuned, please, for this, because we will have the ticket giveaway later on, and of course after the break we will continue and get down a little bit more on the consumer side with Marc and on the food part. So stay tuned for the break, and now we will have a short video.
Who owns your data? Who owns your money? Your future. We are approaching a new dawn. Blockchain technology. Artificial intelligence. Sustainability. Part of the evolution. Hamburg, Germany, 2021.
And now it's time for our ticket giveaway. So you can win a BLOCKCHANCE 2021 economy class ticket worth 300 euros for the BLOCKCHANCE conference Europe 2021, situated here in Hamburg in July in the upcoming year, as long as Corona doesn't force us to forward the date again. But let's all hope that we get the situation under control and that the conference can happen. And it's a really exciting event. As I already said, I met Marc there in 2019, and it's a great place to inform yourselves and to get in contact with other like-minded people and to hear something about the great ideas that are emerging currently. And I will ask a question now, and the first one who gets to answer it in the Twitch chat will be the one who wins. So grab your keyboard, be ready. And here comes the question. What is the third main topic of the BLOCKCHANCE Europe 2021 conference next to blockchain and artificial intelligence? So I hope this has been listened to. I guess it's not that hard. So actually it's a question of speed. And I guess we will have a winner soon. And the winner is Papa von Auers. So congratulations. That I have an idea about who's behind that, because I've been working for the Auers project as well, and Marc also knows about it. It's a platform for tracking supply chain and also delivering transparency to the consumer about where your food comes from. So that's very, very, I'm happy to have him actually here on the platform. Papa von Auers, congratulations. And yeah, you will get the ticket directly after this show. So let's get back to our discussion right now. And we're back on track for the second half of our talk show here. And I'm happy to have Marc Buckley and Brian Iselin on the call. Marc is talking from Hamburg. Brian is talking from Sweden, as far as I remember it. And now I would like to forward the last question to Marc and focus a little bit more on his projects that are enhancing the consumer's perspective and how blockchain can help us to fulfill the SDGs on that part. And I think, Marc, it's probably best if you can give us a little bit more of a touchy example by choosing something from the food sector, so we can imagine this by having a leaf of tea delivered or something like that, coffee, whatever example you would like to talk about.
Because of time constraints, I didn't mention in the earlier question before we went into break, but there are some fabulous examples. So the World Food Program just received the Nobel Laureate Prize for the work they're doing specifically during the COVID time, delivering meals. But I want you to know they're one of the first big test areas and big organizations that created an app and used blockchain for a program called Share the Meal. They've delivered 87 million meals to date, and they've reached over 50 million people. That's one super example. The other example was our prize winner during the break, and that is ours. It's a Berlin and Hamburg food company that uses blockchain to have transparency, traceability in our food systems, and they were recently recognized in several different locations on, I believe it was on Artif or Frosta Foods, which is a frozen food company that does a lot of fish, and they had this traceability from catch to freezer using their technologies on the packaging, and they are working on many other wonderful things as well. That is another fabulous thing that's going on. And then there's close to 2 billion people in the world that do not have an identification, that are unbankable, where blockchain technologies, distributed ledger technology is really coming to light to solve those problems for those people, to provide them with a self-sovereign ID. So the Netherlands, the Hague University, and Odyssey Connect is a super hackathon that will be going on November 13th through the 15th. They are working on some self-sovereign identification things using emerging technologies and blockchain, fabulous things emerging there. But also, again, the World Food Program provides for the refugees with the UN refugee camps around the world to provide face recognition along with blockchain to give people an identification, to get microcredits, to get food, to get an ID as refugees who may have lost their identification, who may have never had one in the first place, all around the world. So there are some fabulous applications, still need improving, still need even bigger test beds, more implementation on a much larger global scale. We touched earlier on the election of the United States. A big thing that a lot of people don't know is that there are 21 million people in the United States that do not have an identification, no birth certificate, no ID card, no passport, no identification, period, who are eligible. These are just the ones who are eligible to vote that cannot afford to get it or cannot vote out of the 331 million people in the United States. So it's not just Africa and India and those impoverished places that we see, it's in the United States. And so that goes back to what I'm saying is we're still stuck in some very antiquated, old, outdated systems, and our infrastructure needs to get up to speed to provide humanity with the frameworks and the things that we need to get us into a better future, because it really begins with the basic needs of humanity so that we can kind of not leapfrog, but get to another area where we need to be. One thing I really loved, I want to touch real quick upon that Brian said, is that when you, where I have to agree with everything that he's working on, that if you cheapen a product, if you cheapen your employees and give them undecent work or pay, you actually are cheapening life. And when we cheapen life, we really mess up our whole civilization framework, because there is no system in our world that works in this complexity that we've talked about, where the world thrives, our spaceship Earth thrives, where others are being suffering, or that we're all distant cousins, we're all in this together. And eventually there is no place on this earth that we can hide from climate change, biodiversity loss, which are some of the ripple effects that are caused by human rights issues, by not paying a decent wage, by counterfeiting, by human trafficking, and so on. And so I love that those all tie to the SDGs, but they all tie to a better humanity for all of us.
So as we have all these great solutions already out there, and some of them are already getting implemented on a small scale. I know from coffee that is tracked from the field to the coffee machine to the consumer. Actually, I see that there are three big players in this game that can move this forward, and I think we already had all of them in the discussion. So it's the institutions and the governments that are pushing this forward through the SDGs. We have the companies that actually see an advantage of proving to the customer what they're doing and enhancing their production to more efficiency. This is also a very important aspect of the digitization, I guess. And then third part, we have the consumer. And I would like you to maybe just in a few sentences, how do you imagine the consumer? I would say it's almost a revolution that's going on, because we have so far, I don't know what's in the product that I buy. I have absolutely no idea, and I think many producers, they saved some costs by trading that for a lack of human rights in the production, or a lack of health control and biodiversity and sustainability in the production. So right now there's technology emerging, and blockchain is a big part of that, because you need to prove stuff, and digital proof is blockchain. Right now this is emerging, right? So the consumer has it also in his hands to choose to only buy the stuff that proves to be sustainable and fair. So could you maybe go down a little bit on that? Whoever wants to take the toll right now.
Can I jump in, Marc? Is that all right?
Yes, please.
So this is something very close to our heart at Slave Free Trade, because we're just preparing a consumer-facing mobile application, and doing, of course, the research that goes on behind that. And so the consumer research is really quite telling. For people to want to buy something and know that it's not made with, for example, slavery in the background, we're only really talking about less than half of the population in OECD countries care enough about that. And they would only do it, they would only buy it if there's no premium. So if anybody tries to put extra cost on a product and says that it's slave free, then there is not it's not an overwhelming majority of the population. However, the important thing is, and this is really where blockchain is inspiring, I think, is that we don't actually need everybody to create social change. So around all of the SDGs, to achieve the things we need, we do not need 100% of the world's businesses. We don't need 100% of the world's consumers. What we need is a sufficient number of them. Nobody knows what that number is. It's between 1 and 10, right? But it's not the majority, it's not everybody, it's just some, and a sufficient sum. So what we're trying to do, and this is what everybody around social impact blockchain projects is doing, is speaking to a specific audience that will be mobilized to take on, to adopt, to be convinced by that transparency, to want that transparency, and then to act on it. Because there's one thing to think about something as being a good objective. It's it's completely another thing for someone to act on it. So getting someone to act on it, this is where blockchain can really come in handy. This is where transparency is vital. So those individuals who want that transparency and are willing to act on that value that is being opened up to the world, whether the transparency is bringing you climate issues or human rights issues, getting that transparency to those people, they really need to want it in a way that is going to effectively make it worthwhile for everybody involved. And at the moment, on the company side, I have to say, it's a bit of a sell, because transparency is terrifying for a lot of businesses. And this is, I think, the hardest part, right? Half of the consumers want it, so few businesses want to give it. Transparency is terrifying. Marc, would you agree?
Yeah, it's very terrifying. It's also divided a lot on who wants to get on board. I 100% agree with Brian. We need to reach this critical mass, but we don't need everyone to reach that critical mass. There's enough on board. There's a couple things as well. We tend to get into this neo-Darwinism, neoliberalism, survival of the fittest, only the strong survive, and severe competition. That's not how our world works. It works with collaboration and cooperation and working together. And what I want people to know is that there's not just going to be one person, whether it's ours or the World Food Program or someone who comes up with a blockchain solution that's going to solve this problem for all of us. We could have 100,000 hours in World Food Programs and people implementing these technologies, and then we would start to make a dent in the real problems that we have there. What people forget is, one, they don't understand the exponential function, and two, they don't understand we have 7.9 billion, almost 8 billion people on this planet, and they have more than one problem each. They just don't have one problem that we need to solve. Most of them have multiple problems that need to be solved. And even if we're saying Microsoft or Tesla or Google or whoever is Bill and Melinda Gates, they're just tickling the surface to kind of help or put a Band-Aid on it. We could literally have hundreds of thousands to millions of companies that are rolling out these solutions to make our world better. And one caveat, or one thing that we really need to address with the Sustainable Development Goals, it is not an add-on to business as usual. We're not taking our business as usual business model and then just putting a little sustainable add-on or a little bit of greenwashing here. Or a little piece of technology there to make it all of a sudden sustainable. That's not how it works. Sustainability is a lifelong journey, and hopefully to resilience. It's not a goal or an end marker where we reach and then we're done. We can quit working. That's not how it works. But what it is the Sustainable Development Goals are a new global operating system. Realize this: 193 countries, the first time ever, historical precedents, agreed on a roadmap for our future. If you know anything about politics, countries, or these processes, it's hard enough for two to decide where they're going to go to lunch, let alone on a roadmap for a better future. So it is a historical precedent. And what it is raising the bar higher, saying this is the bar globally that we're never going to let humanity get below again. We're going to raise the standard. You can still have nationalism and politics and all that, that can be there, but we've agreed we're never going to let humanity suffer or get below this level again, and set a standard for wage, for trade, for how we interact and what the basics are that each and every human being deserves to have on this planet. And that's really what the Sustainable Development Goals are and the path that we're going on. So I hope that that really helps and is clear for everybody to get into that type of thinking and where we need to go.
The SDGs, what we're talking about here is a new way of being. We are not talking about a new annual report. We're not talking about being able to save water over here and make more plastic over there. We're talking about a new way of being, and the new way of being embeds all of the SDGs. It is like, as Marc very nicely said before, it's the skeletal system and it's the nervous system. These things can't operate on their own. They operate together symbiotically, or they don't operate at all. The whole thing falls down. It's the same with the SDGs, a new way of being. So this is why it's so exciting. The blockchain world, we gravitated to this blockchain world in 2017 because there is enormous potential there to help us create this new way of being with an underlying mesh, if you like. The bricks are the systems, and the blockchain potentially, it's still not realized, but the blockchain is potentially the mortar that keeps these systems together. It's the mesh of trust that brings these systems together, and we work together. This is why we have to take systems approaches to what we're doing. Companies need to think differently. It's not about an annual report, and it's not about just making some extra water available over here to a community and at the same time making more plastic bottles. It's got to be a symbiotic process, and blockchain builds that mesh. I think transparency, the trust that comes from that, is the mesh through which we're binding all of these projects and activities together. And we're not talking about mass adoption. This is another important point from Marc. We don't need mass adoption for these things to achieve social change. We need adoption, not mass.
Yeah. One thing that's kind of hopeful for our listeners, which Brian touched on, is it's not really about mass adoption, but what I want you to know, we're still in the pandemic, but this first, second, and third quarter, when we're talking investments and finance, which hopefully blockchain will solve the future of finance and a lot of things for us in a different way. I want you to know those companies, those organizations that divested from fossil fuels, divested from bad investments that were business as usual or harming our planet, and invested in environmental social governance, ESG funds, sustainable indexes, sustainable funds, outperformed their conventional counterparts 8 out of 10. Conventional counterparts meaning those weren't sustainable index funds. Those were not good investments. Those companies have either folded, seen severe loss or impact, but those companies that had divested and invested and changed their business model in an ESG portfolio, an environmental social governance portfolio, outperformed them. And the Morningstar review, 25 out of 28 outperformed their conventional counterparts. And what I mean is the first, second, and third corner of this year's index during a pandemic, during Black Lives Matters, during a voting time, during many other turmoils, those funds outperformed. Nikkei Index, New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, S&P 500, S&P Global. If Goldman Sachs, the only thing looking as precarious as fossil fuels, and as fossil fuels are a stranded asset, is the meat industry is struggling during this time. We've seen that in Germany with Tunis and in the United States because their business models, and I'm not talking about meat eating or fossil fuels, the business models that they're operating on are reaching a limit to growth. They're not ones that are sustainable. They're not moving forward in this new development. I want to make that clear because a lot of people are saying, well, is there money in it? Is it profitable to be sustainable? Is it a better business model? Hell yes, it is. It's proven during the hardest time in our Earth's situation, that those who've changed their business model, who have implemented the SDGs, are weathering this pandemic better, and it's put them all in a better position to quickly pivot, provide essential services, digital services, and help those who are in need the most during this time. I don't know what else could be more of a proof to people to see.
Yeah, it's already paying out, and I think
absolutely in on that. Yeah.
this is resilience by its definition, right? You invest in something that has a future, and you diversify into that from a business model that is not sustainable. So yeah.
In every crisis, global crisis since the year 2000, ESG funds have outperformed normal funds. The resilience that comes with them weathers things like pandemics, untoward election results, financial crises. And I don't think that we're going to be seeing in the short term. I don't think we're going to be seeing any less crises than we have in 2020, to be frank.
I totally agree. And I think that sustainability is a good roadmap to be on, but we really, and that's what I said is one of the other projects I work on with the UN is this resilience frontiers. What happens after 2030? And the reason it's called resilience frontiers, we need to build more resiliency in our entire world's operating system, because there are climate catastrophes and pandemics and things that are coming that we don't know of today. Whatever may come, we need that resilience to continue to thrive and flourish here as humanity here on this earth. And so, not necessarily being a sustainable business, I'm sure there were some sustainable businesses in Puerto Rico when Hurricane Maria hit, but it wiped them out regardless of how sustainable they were. 100% infrastructure, 90% of agriculture, and they're still rebuilding. And there's other examples like that. Probably Puerto Rico is not the best example, but what we really need is these environmental social governance really integrated in our business plans and models, which gives us resilience during times like this to weather that. And most of those organizations are ones that run a systems dynamic platform business model. And those are all with emerging technologies, AI, very digital transformation. They have these measures in place for their employees, for the sustainable supply chain, the way they do business, that is just a better operating system for all around.
So maybe we're talking about survival of the most sustainable right now, and not survival of the most aggression. We are already approaching, we are already far due to overtime, and I would like to come to the user question right now. And the question I am reading here is, how close is a blockchain proof of casted ballots? How close are we to that? Do you have an idea about that?
Well, there's a couple places that use it to a certain extent that are working pretty well so far. One in Africa, I think. Also, Estonia has different voting processes and using emerging technologies. It's more about just to try for these digital systems. In the United States, there was some sandboxes already created years ago that were using emerging technologies and different things for voting, for ballots, for passing those, that are pretty secure systems. And I just don't see, and I have to go back to the US and pick on my home country a little bit now, how we can have the NSA that is such a, using emerging technologies and listening and spying and whatever they do on that, and they can't figure out a simple voting ballot thing. There's a misplacement in how we're using these technologies, how we can send with privatization of space, with SpaceX, people to the ISS space station, to the moon, and possibly beyond to Mars with that emerging technology, and update it from the shuttle system, from the Sputnik rocket systems, from the way the Apollo missions were, to a much more modern way, but yet still, be bickering over how we're going to do air travel safely. We really need to make that transition to a different future. It's not sci-fi, it's just a better operating system. It's a better model, wastes less resources, it's more efficient, and it doesn't involve us as humanity in the day-to-day aspects of deciding, are we going to vote for the Democrat or the Republic or the Green Party or whatever party. It unifies us as humanity to say, here's the global operating system. As long as that's covered, the crazies can do whatever they want, because we're on a system that's really trustless and transparent and just works.
Yeah.
Redundant.
There's this, there's this issue here, which is that with the voting systems is a perfect example. With modern slavery and human rights is another good example of a kind of an elephant in the room, which is that money flows to those things where there is a consensus of will. And human rights, unfortunately, there is not yet a consensus of will. And on voting, I think there's also these competing interests. Not everybody has an interest in good voting systems. There are these, I remember there were some very promising blockchain startups in the American electoral world. I think Votes was one, VOATZ, and Votem was another. And I have to say, I've lost track of them. I don't know where they're at, but these were ideas. Now, they would come to fruition if there was sufficient consensus of will to be able to bring them to fruition. As Marc says, we can send ships to the moon now. Soon we'll be sending ships to Mars. We can do all sorts of things for spying and for defense industrial activity. But, for remedying forced labor, for remedying child labor, for making every vote count, there are obviously interests against them. There's obviously not a consensus of will because the money is not flowing to it and the will is not there to allow it to happen yet. So this is a kind of an elephant in the room with almost any blockchain conversation is blockchain can help us solve an awful lot of the world's grand challenges, but there is not necessarily a consensus of will that puts the money into it. There is nothing about what we're doing, for example, at Slave Free Trade that can't be solved with the right money. But you think we can drive money to it? No. So this is the real issue, right? Will is the real issue. Blockchain presents a tool, a real opportunity, an inspiring opportunity, but it's really failing to live up to its expectations right now because the money is being driven to those places where we're not achieving against the global development goals, the sustainable development goals. We're not achieving, the money is being driven to places like fintech. And I'm not talking about fintech where we're banking the unbanked. I'm talking about fintech making money for rich men. That's where the money is going at the moment. So this is a crucial thing in the blockchain world right now. And it has been since 2017. It's a great schism has developed where the money has not gone to those things that can achieve the greatest global impact.
And it's great that you
generate more money.
It's great that you point that out. And I think part of the problem is that, of course, some of the money came from sources that were not really in the favor of the masses. As you could see, like the gap between the rich and the poor has been driving bigger and bigger throughout the years, no matter what had been promised by politics. So I think for this is exactly a good part for me to bring it to the last question. And I kind of end it always the same way. I would like each of you to just formulate a demand, what you were asking, whoever you would like to ask something, like the public, like the consumer, like the producers, the corporates, or the institutions, the governments. So pick one out where you think there's the biggest potential to actually overcome these problems and implement the possibilities that we already have. So what's the best thing we could do, and what's your demand? I don't know, maybe whoever wants to start.
Can I jump in first, because it ties into exactly what I was just saying. So my demand would be that we seriously reconsider that money spent on social development and global sustainable development goals needs to have a return on investment, needs to have a capital return on investment. Let's rethink that. Money should not only go to where it creates more money, because otherwise, if that's the case, we are not going to solve the sustainable development goals. We are going to be 64 years behind the implementation of those goals. because of that simple fact that people don't put their money towards things that don't generate a return and make them better off. Instead of, we need to reconsider that and start putting money towards things that make the world better off.
That's, yeah, I really hope for people to realize that, because where the money flows, things happen actually, right? So
there's a selfishness that needs to be overcome.
it is actually, we need to probably define a new way of selfishness, because we all would like to live in a world that is worth living in, right? And talking about natural resource depletion and climate catastrophe that is already happening. It's not that you have to really care with every transaction what has happened throughout the whole supply chain. Just care about your own future, and that actually makes investment already in a different perspective. So yeah, I'm getting the hint here that we need to get to fast forward a little.
Is what we're looking for, yeah.
So now the question to Marc, what would you like to ask whoever?
Well, I'd like to answer that same question that Brian did. So I really think that the big question is WTF. The burning question is WTF. And no, it's not the swear word, although we've been asking ourselves that this year a lot. It's what's the future, and what's the direction and where we're going. And I'm very hopeful and optimistic that if we realize how many jobs, how much a resilient, beautiful, desirable futures, multiple, are available to us all, if we stop waiting for the future to be delivered to us, but realize we are members on this spaceship Earth, and we can put our hand on the steering wheel and apply the SDGs in our business and really steer the future that we want to achieve using emerging technologies. The opportunities are endless. Things that really excite me is new operating systems for our Earth, for a world that unify everybody, global citizenry passports, self-sovereign identifications for humanity. Instead of universal basic income, why don't we use a trustless system like distributed ledger technology to give everybody a standard basic of limiting human rights that everybody's allowed to have. We have enough, we have the technology, we can do it. And what we're all seeing is that all over the world, whether it's the Trumpocalypses, the Bolsonaros, the Putins, the Shays, the Duartes, or whoever they are, that our current civilization frameworks are not working for us anymore. There's more unrest, more things bubbling to the surface, and we really need to think, what's the future, and get to work on it. Stop waiting for one of these crazies to deliver it to us. And there's some good things out there, and the best one is the world's first ever global moonshot, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I dare you to even try to greenwash and start to put them into your life and your business, and you'll be so surprised, even if you try to greenwash, what the positive results will be. You say, wow, this is a better model. Instead of greenwashing, I'm actually going to do it because I'm seeing the result. And that's even companies I know who've tried that. That's what's happened.
Yeah, it changes the DNA. It's a new DNA.
Yeah, that's actually, I don't want to interrupt you, but I have to, and it's a perfect ending. People out there, take control, make sure you think about what the future should be, and implement it into everyday action. It's step by step, and each consumption decision, each decision how you direct your company to, that is actually what changes this place. And as we've already heard, it's not about directly getting the masses to adopt it. It's about leading small part that is actually showing how everything could work. So yeah, I'm really thankful for your insights and for this great discussion. And I hope, even though we haven't touched like such big parts like the whole cryptocurrency and the changes we see in the financial system, which is also a big foundation that needs to change. the changes we see in so many different parts that blockchain could actually help. But I think we had like great insights from both of you guys and the parts you are working at. We have a good idea of what the SDGs are and how we can get there. So this is what I hope for, and I really like to thank you for being here, Marc and Brian. And I would also like to thank the audience for being part of this and for spreading the word. This will be tuned on YouTube directly afterwards, so you can share this conversation and tell people that there is something important they need to take care about. And of course, I would also like to thank the team that has hopefully done a great job in the technical part. I haven't witnessed everything, if every cut was perfect, but it's not that easy, as you might imagine, in a live show. So thank you very much to all of them as well. Besides the YouTube link, you can also look into the rest what's in our channel. It's www.youtube.com/c/blockchance. And you can also discuss with us on our Telegram messenger. It's t.me/blockchance. And yeah, also a question to the audience: what title, what topic would you like to have discussed here on the show in the future? So give us your feedback about that as well and your ideas. And now it's time for me to announce the next show. Before that, I would like to give you, actually both of you, a little time to say goodbye to the audience, because I kind of moved on from that point. So Marc and Brian, thank you for being here. And now you can say goodbye.
Marc, you go first.
Thank you very much, everyone. It was a privilege to be on the show, and I hope we can have many more, and we'll see you at the BlockChance conference next year, hopefully live in person. And if not, we'll be again online. So I'll stick around and follow your progress. We can all do this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marc.
Yeah,
Brian?
Likewise. Thanks very much for having me on the show. It's been terrific to be here and get to discuss these things. Elephants in the room and the positivity of the future. Let's all choose the right future, a good one, a positive one. It's in our power.
Thank you, Brian. There's a lot of hope and possibilities. Let's move in that direction. And now it's time for me to announce the next show, which will be at December 2nd. Basically, the BlockChance Online Live is every first Wednesday in the month. And the topic will be governance with blockchain technology. Also a big topic we haven't even touched today, but decentral governance is a very democratic idea, and I'm very excited to talk about that topic with Max Emanuel Schwarzer from DAXA, with Christian Borkert from Juribo Legal and Consulting, and he's been also the co-author of the blockchain strategy for Baden-Württemberg. And with Zoltan Fasikas, he's the initiator of Blockchain Lab at Iteratech. And yeah, that is also a very exciting topic. And yeah, now it's up to me. Thank you very much for being with us, and goodbye. Long live the blockchain.